Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today on Mastering Workplace Conversations. My name is Karen Crane, and I am the MD of Creative Talent at McGarry Bowen here in New York. I wanted to first thank the 4As for putting this together. It's a very big undertaking, and I appreciate all the effort and guidance that they've been giving me in putting this webinar together. I'd also like to thank K & Black Talent. They have been an amazing partner to me throughout my career, and I just want to thank them for asking me to join their series of presentations with the 4As. It's really an honor to be here, and hopefully some of you will learn from some of the experiences that I'm sharing today. And we'll have time after the presentation for Q&A, and hopefully you'll feel free to ask any questions at that point. But as we get underway, I just wanted to start off by sharing how I thought about crafting this presentation and the things that I was thinking about and asking myself in terms of a collaborative environment and what's the benefit of me speaking about how to create one. So I had to start thinking about what are the advantages, or what have been the advantages of having one, and what are the disadvantages of not having one, and the different experiences that I've had in my career that kind of apply to these questions. And from my role as creative talent manager, I know for a fact that collaborative culture influences an organization's ability to be successful, because you kind of drive the client and brand promise. So it helps you understand your colleagues' work better, as well as ultimately the client's business better. You're increasing your trust in your client's expertise and theirs and yours. You also are designing an experience that helps you deliver on your own career promise to yourself. But as even with the best intentions, as you go out and start working in the industry, you realize that not every situation works out exactly how you planned or designed it in your mind. And oftentimes, I think many of us have felt confused or not really sure of what to do in those situations. And what I tried to cover in this presentation is just certain things that I've learned along the way, and hopefully those things that I point out to you and the things that I'm bringing up in this presentation and webinar will help teach you just how to understand how best to navigate these situations, help you apply those very same learnings that I've gotten out of running a creative department for the last 17 or so years, and then you can apply those best practices and make the most of your day-to-day career through the relationships that you cultivate in the industry at the different places that you're working. So with that, I will kick off the presentation, and we can go to our first slide, which is going to cover the situation of what to do when you feel stuck in a rut. And I'm going to move to the next slide if I can figure out how to do that on this computer. Hold on just one moment. Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what to do when you feel stuck. And at this point, I think that I might want to ask that we do our first poll. The first question I'd like to ask is, how many of you currently feel stuck in a rut?
Okay, I've launched the first poll question. I will give everybody a couple of seconds to try to participate. We're up to 25%.
We're up to 25, okay.
We're up to 50.
Oh, it's a big number.
I'll give everybody a couple of seconds or two. Okay, 3. We'll be closing in 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
And the results is 50-50 between find yourself.
Wow. Interesting. That's so interesting. Well, first things first, I think what's really important to call out is pat yourselves on the back, even though you feel like you are currently stuck in a rut and either mired in busy work or that you're currently trying to live up to an ideal that you have in your mind. First things first is pat yourself on the back for getting to this point in your career. And then I think also one thing to keep in mind is that, your career is not linear, right? In fact, non-linear, there's a lot of talk about how non-linear is now the new normal. And I think as far as I had some thoughts about the current role, and, not having that be what you have in mind. I'm happy to see that none of you are experiencing that because, oftentimes that comes up as a result of a hiring manager not really explaining the role to the candidates, right? So, I think that's really great to see that nobody has been kind of duped into taking a role that they didn't expect it to be. But if you're finding that you're, trying too hard to live up to this ideal of yourself, this perfect version of yourself, there's definitely something that I can relate to that in terms of an experience that I had. I'm just going to click through these different things that we were talking about. As far as my own career, I got a call last year. I'm a big believer in always taking the call, and truth be told, I wasn't really sure if the opportunity was the right opportunity for me, but I took the call anyway. I'm like I said, big believer in taking the calls when they come across. It's always good to network and meet people. So as I was going through the experience, early days of meetings, we were kind of dancing around this role, but as I kept meeting people in the organization, I kept thinking that the more I was excited about the role and the opportunity. But what I realize now, and after 6 months of interviewing and many conversations later, ultimately I was very disappointed because even though I was told I would be getting an offer and that I was the candidate that they wanted for the position, I didn't wind up getting it. And I was like I said, very disappointed. But I think that once I took a step back and realized and was honest with myself, I think I was kind of getting myself caught up in much of the, kind of music, or maybe not music, but more the noise in my head about, how can I be sure if this is the right next step for me? How do I figure that out? How is this going to be in terms of the things that I want as the ideals that I have in my mind about this agency? Am I sure that this is it, or am I settling? So I'd like to offer an approach, and as you can see on the next slide, design thinking, which has gotten a lot of buzz these days in the industry, and kind of using that design thinking and applying it actually to a career, either a career change or a job change, and helping you get unstuck. The principles of design thinking are, iterating ideas and coming up with the ideas, and then, finding something to quickly test and prototype, come back to the results and kind of look at the test experience that you had, and then make some changes and fine tune it, and then you go out and start the whole process all over again. And I think, once you free yourself from the idea that you don't have to have everything figured out perfectly before you can take the next step, you can start doing that. You free yourself from the things that are holding you back, and you can, again, within this design thinking principle, you can start to apply that thinking to your confusing situation that you might be faced with, and you can find it, easier to solve. And I think that, in terms of application, I think that ways to apply the design thinking principles is to put it to use in different ways, like joining professional organizations. You can never underestimate the value of joining professional organizations like the 4A's, obviously, or for creatives, you know, the One Club, or strategists. I know there's a contest and a participation in something called Griffin Farley. I think that those are the things that you can do when you talk about like coming up with the idea and then going out and quickly testing it and prototyping the idea. Well, that's what you can do by joining these professional organizations, and you know, that'll help you start to get yourself unstuck and help you stop feeling lost or frustrated. I also think, again, you know, applying the action of going out and taking meetings and going on interviews. You know, you can start talking to people who are doing something that you think you might like to do next. You can take them to coffee, go to lunch, go on interviews. A lot of times you think the grass is greener at other agencies, but then when you go and meet with somebody who is at that agency and, you know, you start to hear about some of the things that they're going through, sometimes the grass isn't, you know, it's not as green as you thought it was. So, you know, I would also make it very clear to those people as you are speaking with them that you're open to opportunities. There's never, you know, there's never anything wrong with having that conversation, both internally and externally. I think that it's really important that you can sit down also, like I said, in terms of sitting down with your boss and engaging not only with the leadership that you have at the agency, but then also engaging in training initiatives at the agency. It's never too late to update your skills, so you can, you know, a lot of agencies are offering not just training and development in terms of actual skills, you know, that apply to software and, you know, for creatives, there's always new technologies coming out, but there's also different things that are often run internally. You know, here at McGarry Bowen, we have something called MBU, which is MB University. At 360i, we had a very similar program. So these are the types of things that you can engage with in terms of, you know, helping you, again, just kind of get some motivation behind those feelings that you're having of being stuck, and I think also just getting yourself out of the rut. And I think that the other thing before we move on to this next section is that there's no perfect you or perfect right job for you. I think that, you know, again, part of the reason why I got, you know, I found myself in the situation that I was in was that I was, you know, putting this pressure on myself to make this one right decision, and whatever it was that I was going to do ultimately probably wouldn't have been the right thing. I needed to abandon that ideal so that I could liberate myself and get myself back on a path that was going to get me unstuck. And I think that that opened me up to options that probably weren't visible to me prior to that happening. And by applying design thinking to your career, you're giving yourself a chance to articulate different options to consider, and then, you know, it might wind up looking, if, you know, you cut to 5 years or 10 years looking back, it might look like you were just kind of making it up as you went along, but you weren't making it up as you went along. You're actually designing it as you went along. And I think that those are, you know, some of the key things that I would point out to you in terms of getting yourself unstuck and out of a rut. So the next section that I wanted to cover in terms of how to cultivate agency camaraderie is how to be heard. And I think that, you know, there's something, as I was doing my research and thinking about, you know, how to be heard and how I am able to get people not just to listen to me, sometimes do things that they don't want to do, but also, you know, how am I putting, you know, skills to use during the day. And I think one of the main things, you know, at the very beginning of this process is, if you want to be heard, first you must listen. And I think some of the success that I've had in my role is my ability to listen. And I don't mean that that you should, listen if somebody's just talking out at you or taking advantage of your time and just blubbering on about, all sorts of things. I mean it actually, if you're listening and actually engaging in active listening and in the conversations that you're having with your colleagues, particularly when there's a disconnect, you'll ultimately get heard. And if you stop and think about friends, teammates, colleagues, and all the people in your organization, I'm sure lots of talkers come to mind. But if you stop to think, how many great listeners do you know or can you name around you, I bet you that number would be a lot smaller. And then again, if you take another step back and think about yourself, I think a good question to ask is how many of us are really paying attention? So this is going to bring us to our next poll. So again, how many of you actually pay attention when someone is speaking?
Thank you, Karen. Let's give everybody a couple of seconds to fill out the poll, participate.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's doing great. We're up to 31%. We just jumped to 44.
Oh, wow.
Let's give everybody another second or two, and then we'll close it. We'll give everybody 3, 2, 1. Here are the results. Wow.
That's great. Well, at least you guys are truthful. Thank you for the other 75% of people who have not checked their device during this webinar. Obviously so many of us are being required to do so many different things during the workday. We all have to multitask. It's just kind of an expectation of everyone. So I appreciate you guys sharing your feedback with me. And so, just kind of continuing on that thought, I'm sure, many of you can recall a time when you were in a meeting or a conversation and you kind of zoned out, or you checked your email, or you were perhaps pretending to listen when you really were thinking about all the other things that you'd rather be doing at the moment, and nobody could blame you for that. But, with all the things that can distract us at any given moment at work, staying focused and actively listening to the person sitting across, it almost requires building a skill set of staying focused and being able to concentrate. In my role as MD of talent in creative, I'm constantly problem solving with the person or the team sitting across from me, and asking for solutions to what will often seem like a very difficult problem to solve. I often find myself in the middle of conversations about anything from resourcing talent across accounts that may be conflicting, new business needs on top of existing business, employee relations within the creative teams, or with managers of the employees who will often, do anything within their power to avoid having a difficult conversation with their employees. So, the ways that I think are best to help set you up in terms of, really being able to get yourself heard is actually to participate in what I would like to call active listening. And in order to, do this for as long as I have, and in order to be able to develop the relationships and be successful in my role, I had to pay attention and participate in active listening so that I could ultimately be heard. And there's a gentleman by the name of Julian Treasure. He's a sound and communication expert who gave a TED talk that was really interesting, and it kind of stuck with me. I heard it a few years ago, but he suggests the following acronym to stay engaged and actually listen, actively listen, which I find helpful when I sit down with my people, and it's called RASA. So RASA stands for the R stands for receive. So you're receiving the information. So, basically pay attention to the person who's listening, who's sharing with you rather. Take notes if you have to when you're receiving that information. It helps me also, taking notes helps me avoid interrupting somebody as they're talking. So I just kind of let them unload, It also, my notes will help me, like I'll go back and look at my notes because it gives me a reference point. There's often so much being said, especially when it's a heated discussion. It gives me a reference point to kind of, help frame the response that I'm going to put together. And it, just the act of writing while someone else is talking for me, it's just something that it's a tool that I've used throughout my life just to help me retain what exactly I'm hearing. The next letter of the acronym A of RASA is, appreciate. And I think, some of that can be just making sure that you have eye contact. If you're nodding while they're speaking and kind of relating to them while they're speaking and during the conversation to let them know that you're with them. I let them know that I'm on this journey with them in this moment, that they're not kind of just, speaking in the wind. I also, again, kind of going back to the device thing, and, this is part of the modern world, but I really do try to put my device aside, turn it over, so that when someone is coming to me with something that's really important to them, it may not be, in the moment, the thing that I want to focus on, but I put my device aside or turn it over so that I'm not, basically ignoring them. The next letter, S, is summarize. So when you get to the end of the conversation, you're kind of wrapping up, you're giving them a summation of what you understood. Sometimes I'll say, all right, so let's just go back to the beginning. What I think you're saying to me is X, or what I think we need to do about this situation is whatever. So it just, it kind of shows the person that's sitting across from me or the team that's sitting across from me that I've been with them on this journey and that I'm helping them, I'm reiterating the things that we just discussed. And then the last A, the second A is ask. Ask questions of your coworkers after they're done speaking. And, sometimes when you're asking those questions, there's things that you may have misheard or whatever that they want to clarify a little bit more. But you can re-summarize and regroup after that. Those corrections are made and after you've asked those questions. And, I think it's funny because as I was writing this, I started to think like I'm telling a story about almost being like a customer service representative or like somebody that's on a customer service representative hotline. But in a way, you kind of are. I think that we are really in a service industry. The very basic nature of our industry is service. And, even though, so in this role, in the talent function, I'm not dealing with clients per se. I'm not dealing with clients like in brand building, but I'm dealing with clients in terms of the internal people that I'm working with and the candidates that I'm interacting with. So I have to think about the experience that they're having and how I'm helping them walk away from, this relationship and developing a relationship with me that's going to be, a strong one and one that is a healthy one. So yeah, I think that, excuse me, I think that RASA actually also can be related back to what we were discussing in terms of being stuck in the last section. Because when you're taking an active role and really engaging with the person sitting across from you, again, how are you being heard? Well, how are you listening? The people across from you are going to feel valued, and they will often give you the same respect. So, perhaps they've moved on to a new job, and you think that you might want to work at that new place or that new agency. Well, if you've made them feel valued and understood when you've been sitting down and connecting with them, the less of the likelihood that you're going to feel stuck when you reach out to them because they're going to be happy to do the same thing for you. So, that's, I think, it's been the tool. I watched this TED Talk a couple of years ago, and it's just, this acronym RASA has been really an easy one to remember, and it just helps me, as I go through my day, and, as I'm interacting with people. There are other things that you can also do in terms of making sure that you're actively engaging in conversation with your coworkers. And one of those things that I like to bring up is thinking about your audience So before you're actually meeting with people, if you think about what your colleagues really care about, that will help you frame conversations, or perhaps actually bring the conversation back to a neutral ground if the conversation gets really contentious and goes off into a direction that, isn't getting anywhere. Find out what they're interested in, find out what they care about. If they blog, subscribe to it. If they're on Twitter, follow them. Learn what makes the people around you tick, so that as you're working through issues together, there is some kind of framework or like neutral ground that you can go to, so that you're, again, kind of setting up this bond with them and this relationship with them in order to ultimately be heard. And on a personal note, like so many people in this industry, my now husband and I used to be coworkers. And, we were coworkers who really didn't care much for each other, to be honest. In my role of running the creative department, one could say that I had to manage him in certain situations. And to be quite honest, that was not the easiest thing to do. My husband has a wildlife blog. He's a wildlife photographer while he's not running his creative group at his agency. And he had a wildlife blog that he was posting. He's been doing it for about 10 years. And I made sure that I signed up for it. I kind of innocently. First of all, I like animals, but also in the long term, it wound up giving us some neutral ground in order to ultimately not be frenemies anymore. It gave us something that we could bond on, and took the heat out of the disagreements that we would often get into about how he needed to go on trips for his wildlife photography, and I was going to have to figure out who was going to be covering his work. So I don't know if we want to get further into this, because, I think that there might be another webinar topic for people who are working together and how they go from being enemies at work to dating. But I also think that, it helps to have that neutral ground. I also think that there's if you have your own perspective about the meetings that you're going to and the things that you're engaging in with your coworkers. So sometimes as simple as just knowing what questions you want to ask before you get to the meeting. You shouldn't be afraid to do that. Oftentimes I think people hold back when they're in a group setting because they don't really, want to put themselves out there, or kind of raise their hand or speak up. But I think how do you expect to be heard if you can't sit and ask a question yourself? Before, when we were talking about being stuck in a rut, I know nobody responded about feeling too much like a doer or feeling too much like they were, mired in too much busy work. But I do think that it's important to point out that, if you don't form your own perspectives and ask questions about the things, again, engaging in this active listening, you will be, kind of labeled as somebody who doesn't need to have a perspective or doesn't need to have a seat at the table, because nobody knows that you have something of value to add. And, somebody in management is not going to be looking at you in order to, have your ideas shared. So I think, again, that also goes back to the being stuck. So all these things are related in terms of helping you in your career management and career designing the career experience that you have. So the next topic I would like to discuss is building successful partnerships. So successful partnerships, I think in this section I'm going to cover some things that were key to experiences that I've had, and a lot of those experiences came out of these bonds and successful partnerships that were formed. I think that some of those key elements were, a shared vision, a lot of commitment and effort on all sides to get everybody on the same page and get the work done. If there is no shared direction, there's no foundation with which to move forward, and disconnects and problems are just bound to arrive. So I think the overall objectives need to be on the same page in order to reach that end goal and to have those partnerships built. So that brings us to our next poll. So what I'd like to ask, Joyce, if you want to join us, the next questions I'd like to ask is, how many people remember the infamous story of Apple almost folding without Steve Jobs? And on a more personal note, related to our discussion and our topics in our industry, how many people remember the reputation Gray had before its new CCO, Tor Marion, joined the agency?
Okay, the poll is open and people are participating. We're up to 27%, 33. Okay. Just jumped to 40. I guess they all like this question.
I guess so.
47.
Okay.
53. Okay. Great participation, guys. All right, we're closing in 3, 2, 1. And the result, wow.
Yeah, all right. I like it. Well, this is good because you guys all know about the story of Apple folding, almost folding without Steve Jobs. And this gives me the perfect platform with which to go into my my next section, which is about the experience that I had at Gray when Tor brought me in. Gray was, not known for its creative product, nor was it known to be the kind of agency that had a good, creative reputation. I joined Gray after Tor was named CCO. He brought me in to help him achieve the mission, which was basically to give the agency a shot in the arm and help, help the mission of help, get this creative revolution underway. So that, that ability to be able to wrap my head around this shared vision was really an important one, because it didn't just apply to me. Our whole C-suite aligned on defining Gray as the agency known for famously effective work. And everyone in the agency knew the expectation was to bring that vision to life on every client business possible. And once those words were joined and that brand vision for the agency came to life, everyone who was on the C-suite level, the chief marketing officer, the chief talent officer, and of course, Tor, the chief creative officer, when each of them hired their right hand, myself included, the goal was clear, and we all, explicitly signed on to help achieve that very same goal. And so then the systems and people and teams that we built and we all put into place also reiterated that very same vision. And then over the course of a couple of years, everywhere you looked across the agency of what then became over 1,000 people, all those brains were going the same direction, and we won, I think it was infamously like 23 of 25 pitches over a 2-year period. And we started winning creative awards, etc. So it was a major accomplishment. But if we did not have that vision statement and the articulation of it, again, also the effort and the commitment to make it work. But if we didn't have and didn't start with that vision statement that created the shared purpose, I don't think that we would have gotten there. It was very helpful in terms of articulating how the group would define the success, and then what the key contributions were that we could make that would also help define the success and kind of bring the agency along this path. So I think that, going back to just the beginning and thinking about camaraderie and a collaborative culture and how that will help and how that applies to this section, you're continually encouraging your employees to apply their talents and become motivated by that collective mission, not just by the intrinsic, the personal gain or, the autonomously functioning, creative. It doesn't mean that everything was perfect when we had the experience that we had at Gray. It was a lot of hard work and strategic decision making. Again, we had to go back to the desire and the commitment to make it work across the board. But, you know, with that shared vision at the very first step of creating our partnerships internally, we could have never accomplished what we did. So taking that as a basis, I think as you're working with your teammates and building the partnerships that you're building internally at the agency and externally, you know, I know this webinar has a lot of people who are also doing client service and strategy. So I think some of the other pieces of this that can be applied here is, you know, knowing yourself and how to build upon your strengths, again, to create these successful partnerships. Successful partnerships are not built upon weak relationships. The best alliances ultimately link strength to strength, and it's a complement, right? So I think if you know yourself and know your own strengths, you'll be able to identify how your strengths can best partner with somebody else who's around you. I think, you know, another point is, you know, find your stakeholders in and out of the agency. And if you aren't sure of, you know, who they are as of even first step, I think one thing you could do is draw a circle on a, you know, piece of paper, that's you. And then, you know, draw the circles around you, and those circles will represent all the different groups or people that you interact with, including clients, and that would be your group of stakeholders. I think, you know, again, getting to know them. Are they, you know, do they blog? Are they, you know, are you following them on social media? Do you ask them about their lives outside of the office in order to humanize them and be able to find common ground when you inevitably disagree with something that's coming up? I think also another way to build a successful partnership is asking for feedback, 360 feedback from people that you're working with. Some of the questions you can ask is, what would you like to see improved in our relationship? You know, don't underestimate the power of feedback that you get, because that, again, building upon your own strengths, it'll help you adjust and you know, grow as an employee. I think, you know, one of the best things to do is to hear critical feedback, even though it's really difficult. But, you know, the differences that you have with people internally are the things that will ultimately negatively impact your end goal. So, you know, you could also ask, you know, what works well in our relationship? You know, what would you like to see changed in how we work together? What could I do more of to make our partnership more successful? And, you know, with that feedback, then you can kind of take that feedback and build a game plan in terms of, you know, how to improve and build upon the very interactions that you're having day to day. And I think, you know, of course, the last piece of advice I would suggest is to address issues early and head on with the partners that you're working with. Negative emotions always fester, and you know, things move so quickly in this industry. It's easy to be distracted by a ton of other things, and you know, a lot of times I think we tend to just avoid conflict, look the other way. It's uncomfortable. There's too much going on. I can't really say anything. But you know, that will become that will get in the way, and it can become toxic, you know, almost overnight. So, you know, the commitment that you're making to this partnership will help you focus your energies on the solutions to help get your stakeholders, you know, kind of back on track when things do go off track, and get you back to supporting the relationship and the partnership and help you achieve on your aligned goals. So that being said, that brings us to our next section, which is how to work with different personalities. And let me pull up that slide. So how to work with different personalities. And, you know, essentially when you come right down to it, how to work with different personalities really can be described as teamwork, right? So that is going to bring us to our next poll, our last poll of the day. How many people here grew up playing team sports?
Okay, as Karen said, this is our last poll of the webinar. People are participating.
I played soccer. I played soccer and I was a cheerleader, so let's see how many people followed what I did when I was growing up.
Very cool. All right, so this is our last question, our last poll question. Let's try for 100% participation, guys. We're up to 50. Just jump to 57. Come on, we can do it. 64. A couple of more stranded. Okay. Up to 64. We're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Oh, great. We have a lot of soccer players in this audience. I love it. And we have some cheerleaders. That's great. So, I think that the main thing to take away about the team sports that you played, it makes you realize, at least for me it does, it makes me realize how much I depended upon and relied upon the other teammates that I had that contributed to the success of the overall team. And if we wanted to make another sports analogy of working with different people, and how that ultimately relates in teamwork, we can think about basketball. If you think about basketball, teamwork would not be street ball. Teamwork would be the NBA, because street ball is really like, showing off for yourself. You're playing for yourself rather than the team. You're doing it for your love of basketball, not necessarily the love of other teammates. But in basketball, as a profession, you're part of a team. You're practicing a lot together. You're playing practice games. You're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the team. There's also, it's a much more matrixed situation because you've got the managers, the agents. It's actually a business, not just a game. And I think that, in doing my research, I came to find out that collaborating in teams and working with different personalities, it increases motivation and productivity. And when a team is connected, it moves as a team, not a group of individuals. Another way to understand, working with different personalities and the benefits of teamwork, we can also think about and look to the sky, because if you think about the geese flying south for the winter, although I don't know this winter, well, we're not in winter yet, but it's been so warm, I don't know if any of that has happened yet this year, but as they fly south, they go south in the V formation. And their task of flying south for the winter is the epitome of teamwork. They work together to get the entire team to finish more efficiently. They work together towards the common goal. There's power in those who travel together. So they are, falling out of formation will ultimately, there's more resistance. They're not able to fly as efficiently. So those who travel together there's going to be more power in that. Everyone must take turns doing the difficult job. So when a bird becomes tired, he or she rotates to the back of the formation. And, the effective team, birds provide encouragement. I mentioned cheerleading before. I was a cheerleader, but, if you think about it, when you see the geese flying south in winter, often you're hearing them, make the noise or honking at each other. They're actually giving each other encouragement because they're trying to help each other get to this end goal of flying south. So, it's a very interesting very organic way of looking at how working with these different personalities, they as a group are able to get to their end goal. And once you establish a team, there are a few different ways in which you can, successfully work together as a team, and in terms of working with these different personalities. I think, you figure out how people like to work best and you adapt. Obviously, you're going to pick your battles. You're not going to, fight over everything. You're sharing respect for the person that's sitting across from you, or if we go back to the beginning of our presentation, you apply RASA, the active listening, and, you can be a cheerleader, honking at your coworkers, for lack of better words. I think that, encouragement goes a long way to get everybody to reach the end goal. And, if we think about also different personalities and people in the business, last week I had the pleasure of going to the 3% conference here in New York. And one of the panels that I listened to or went to was the Legends panel, which had Judy John and David Droga kind of talking about, what they have experienced, sharing their, industry experience and career experiences. And they were sharing, certain things that safeguarded their staff from creative burnout over the years. But one of the things that they shared that really, to me, related most to the discussions that we've been having today is shifting, and for them, these were defining moments for each of them. They both noted shifting their perspective from a culture of me, which, kind of going back to street ball, you're in it for yourself, to we, and thinking about the team. And, David was talking about how one of the things that he noticed is that, creatives used to be what he called fighter pilots. It was very adversarial. It used to be, creative versus account. And that, his perspective was now it's much more about, ideas can come from anywhere. The collaboration is what gets everybody to the end, to the best work, and getting there quickly, more effectively, and efficiently. And, that the best ideas, like I said, can come from anywhere. And I think, from my perspective, I think that, I know that my experience, and I know that I'm good at my job, and the years of experience that I've had has helped me kind of frame this presentation today. But I also know that if these two legends in the industry are talking about, the most defining moments at this point in their careers was the fact that they shifted their thinking from the culture of me to a culture of we, then, there has to be something to it. So I think in terms of working with the different personalities, always having that team mentality in mind and applying that to your day-to-day will help get you to the end goal and have the most success. And that actually wraps up our presentation. I'd like to thank you all for listening to me today, and I'd also like to open it up to a Q&A.
Thank you, Karen.
If you have questions, you're welcome.
Thanks, Karen, for those thoughts. We are now in Q&A portion of our webinar. If you have any questions, please go to the question box in your go-to panel and type submit your questions. Okay, Karen, we just received a question. Okay. The first question is, what do you currently do when you feel stuck in a rut, and how, after this session, do you feel you can build on that process?
So I think, when you're feeling stuck in a rut, I think some of the things that we were covering earlier. So engaging with people, applying design thinking. So, not just kind of sitting back and thinking, but actually going and testing something quickly, doing a rapid prototype, take rapid prototype, meaning reaching out to somebody, trying to get a coffee with somebody, looking at someone in perhaps a different industry, a different section of the agency that you're working in, talking to them, getting them to engage with you, and coming back, kind of taking those learnings and applying it to the next phase of getting yourself out of the rut and making a change that's going to be a positive change in your life. So those, again, the design thinking, I think, is something that we can apply to this, even though we're not designers. And that process in and of itself, I think, will help ultimately get you out of a rut. That's kind of what I've done in the past.
Great question, and thank you for the answers, Karen. We just received another question. The question is, what are some skill sets you really want to hone in on but don't yet know how to? Some examples: technical, negotiation, software skills, etc.
Well, so I think that as far as some of the skills that I'd like to hone in on, but I don't know how to, I'd probably say I'd love to be better at PowerPoint. So I think I'm going to take some of my own advice and go to some of the university, MB University training sessions. I also think that there's lynda.com. I'll probably sign myself up for that. As far as, there's certain things, sometimes I know myself, I can get a little emotionally attached, if you will, to getting problem solving and getting something taken care of. If I know the solution that, I think is the best is right there in front of us, but I'm having a hard time getting everybody on the same page. I know myself, I can get frustrated. So just remembering and, learning, reading and learning how to take the emotion out of it and not have too much of the emotion cloud my thinking, then I definitely think that I will be able to take those skills and learn from them.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
It's okay.
You're welcome.
Another question that just came in is, does anyone have a particular idea that they're unsure of how to test drive? Karen?
Oh, okay. So I thought you were asking the audience. Sorry about that. So I think, if anybody does, obviously I'm here at McGarry Bowen, and I'm available to offer advice and guidance. So if anybody does feel that they would like to reach out to me, I am happy to offer guidance and advice. I think one of the things that can come up often when you are unsure of how to test drive is you do start to feel stuck in a rut. And I think that, again, kind of going back to the design thinking principles will help you test drive, quote unquote, some of those things. I think also as you're test driving, some of the things that we talked about in terms of those partnerships and relationships that you're cultivating, I think that there'll be less fear in terms of test driving and less hesitation on your part to test drive those ideas if you are actually able to, get out of your own way and not think about there's only one perfect way that this test drive can go or this conversation can go. So I think that would be something to keep in mind.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And the question is, do you feel like there's been a situation where you and or someone you know could have applied design thinking to a challenge but weren't exactly sure how to?
I mean, yeah, those challenges come up every day. I want to think about, it's a great question. I want to think about exactly what that challenge was and how we could have applied design thinking. We're looking to close a job and we have a very specific ask from the creative director on what what this candidate needs to look like, quote unquote, in terms of the work that they've done and the brands that they've worked on. And I think that what's happening is the process of sourcing those people is getting in our way. I think that we are spending way too much time kind of getting caught up in these details as opposed to applying design thinking, which would be applying, a quick test, so to speak. So a quick test would be, perhaps trying somebody out freelance and seeing if they would work. And if they're not going to work out, then you have the opportunity to move on to another candidate. So, if we kind of very loosely took design thinking and applied it to the recruiting process, I think it would help us get to an end much more quickly. Because like I said, right now we're perseverating in and just going around in circles in terms of what exactly this ideal candidate should look like, as opposed to really doing what we need to do, which is get to an end. And ultimately, when it's not just my team that gets frustrated, in terms of a creative director who's a challenge to work with, or a hiring manager that's a challenge to work with. Ultimately, it also winds up affecting client business, because if you don't have that body in the seat and that person doing that job, first of all, certain tasks aren't getting done, obviously, but then there's the whole billing issue, and if the account is one that is reconcilable, you're losing every day that goes by that you don't have somebody sitting in that seat, you're losing revenue. And I think too, applying design thinking, I'm going to talk to my creative director about this, because I think, right now we're kind of stuck in this, I think you should hire this person and he doesn't. So it's almost become like a power play. Whereas if I take design thinking and actually talk to him about that and applying it here, it kind of gives us a neutral ground. And it gives us something to think about besides just me disagreeing with him about candidates. So I think that will help, again, get us out of a rut. It'll give us neutral ground, so we'll build a stronger partnership. And, again, as I was mentioning throughout this presentation, all these things are very closely related, and one definitely helps the other. So, again, yes, I think, I will definitely try to apply design thinking to this particular job that needs to get closed, and hopefully it'll help us get to finding the right person for the role quickly.
Great. These were some great questions that you sent through. Thank you again. Thank you, Karen. We want to thank you for being here today with us. It was a pleasure to have you. While this is the second session in our Master Workplace Conversation series, you can still get access to the previous sessions. For any questions, email us at webinar@aaaa.org. To get access to this deck, all you need to do is fill out our survey that comes out right after this webinar. It will take you tops 2 minutes to fill out. Once you do fill out the survey, you will get a link to the deck. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Joyce, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.